we are at risk. We are at risk right now. And Democrats are like, sorry, not going to help. Got to protect our reputation. Like, what is wrong with them? Hey guys, welcome back to the Base Politics Show. I'm Hannah Cox here with Brad Polumbo. This week, COVID-19 patient zero is finally revealed. Conservative grifters seem to really hate Juneteenth. A Titanic tour goes horribly wrong, and so much more. Let's jump in. We've got to get into some information that was obtained through another kind of lawsuit, something called a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA for short. And Brad, we've actually had this FOIA since 2021. It was obtained by a nonprofit organization that, full disclosure, guys, I'm a fellow for. I've been working with this group for about a little over a year now as a fellow, and they are called the White Coat Waste Project. They are an animal welfare organization for people who don't believe in throwing blood on people for wearing fur, or for people who think you can still eat steak from time to time.
PETA, yeah, not crazy like PETA. I'll see tweets from PETA and I'm like, wow, some of these activists are wacky.
They're nuts. And actually, many of the people who founded White Coat Waste Project left PETA and were disgusted by their practices and started it. And so their main focus is they're very singular focused. They're an umbrella organization for anybody who thinks that the government should not be using taxpayer dollars to fund animal torture, which I think most people could probably get on board with. And so that's how they were formed. That's what they've been watching. But Brad, because of that, they stumbled upon a behemoth of a story when COVID-19 hit, because as everything in the government and the mainstream media started working to censor information and to basically lie to the American people about everything that had been going on scientifically behind the scenes leading up to this, they were the only organization that had been tracking things like Dr. Anthony Fauci, the NIH, gain of function research, because all of these things pertain to taxpayer-funded animal torture. So they had this arsenal of information. They had multiple lawsuits and FOIAs they had already filed against Fauci and the NIH, not because they necessarily knew COVID was going to happen, but because they knew they were illegally funding gain of function research in many labs, including in Wuhan.
And can you remind people what gain of function research is?
Yeah, so let's define a couple basic things and just sort of remind people of who the main players are. So you have Dr. Anthony Fauci. I'm sure everybody remembers that guy. Our fave. He works for the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health. Now, the NIH is a colossal government agency. It has many departments. It has millions and millions of dollars at its disposal. And to be honest, it's kind of sketch because nobody really was paying attention to it all that much before COVID, right? Like, it's just not something that's in the news that much. But they basically are often funding animal torture in labs. That's actually one of the top ways animals get tortured, both in the US and globally, is in government-funded labs. So when you look at a lot of research, the private industries themselves, as much as they can force that onto taxpayers, they want to do it. And so they get a ton of grants into labs everywhere from universities to foreign countries. So anyways, all of this goes back to a practice, though, that they're specifically doing in many of these labs called gain of function research. And this gets really wonky. But basically, gain of function research is very, very risky. It's where you take a disease that we know and you intentionally work to amplify it and make it worse. It's so risky, the practice of doing this, that it was banned under Obama from 2014 to 2017. That was overturned under President Trump, but it had been illegal for some time. Thanks a lot, Trump. And many people have been advocating, even before COVID, that it should always be banned. It's just not worth it. It's too risky. And it does involve animal torture to carry out these manipulations.
So if I remember correctly, a lot of experts do argue it should be prohibited. It's more risky. But the idea, like, to give the devil their due, is that by experimenting on the viruses, they'll figure out more about them and then be better able to combat them or make vaccines or what have you. But a lot of experts do believe the risks outweigh the benefits.
Yeah, I think if you were to play devil's advocate here, you might say diseases often replicate themselves. And so if you are working in a lab to manipulate the disease and replicate it, or create new versions of it as it might end up doing on its own in nature, you could get ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Allegedly. I don't I would fall on the side of saying I absolutely don't think that it is worth it. And I also think it is inhumane practice where you are doing some pretty gross things to animals to manipulate their gene sequences to do some of this. And it's gross. But anyways, so that's what's going on. According to everybody, through about 2021, I think is when the tides first started turning, they were like, we have not been funding gain of function research and we have not been funding the Wuhan lab. But the White Coat Waste Project got the receipts and they were able to show that Fauci and the NIH very much were funding gain of function research. That money was going to the Wuhan lab, and they basically were using a third-party pass-through organization, if you will, which was another nonprofit called Eco Health Alliance. And this was not the only time they were using them. Eco Health Alliance has gotten millions and millions and millions of taxpayer dollars. And
so they're just trying to, like, if the rules say you're not allowed to fund gain of function research, they're like, okay, well, we'll fund this group that will then fund with that money the gain of function research. And they're like, we didn't fund the gain of function research. We would never do that. That's not allowed.
That's exactly right. And so Enter Rand Paul, as many people remember, he consistently went up against Fauci on numerous COVID-19 practices and information. And he basically was finally able to force Fauci and twist his hand on this information. Fauci tried to lie before Congress about it, but he got the truth. And what was interesting was once he kind of cracked him on this, you saw the mainstream media start to change their tune quite quickly. Up until that point, let's remember, people were getting kicked offline, censored, maligned, called racist if they even suggested that perhaps this disease had leaked from the Wuhan lab.
Facebook was just banning people left and right for suggesting this theory.
Yeah. And I always thought this was so laughable. Like, it's racist to suggest that perhaps COVID-19 came from a sketchy lab in the town where COVID-19 first started, a lab that had already had many leaks and that was specifically working on coronavirus.
Right, and the other theory is that it came from the wet market, right, where they have animals that they're eating in Wuhan. And so, look, I don't know enough about the science to know how plausible that theory is. Some people still believe that's the case. But I'll just say this. It was never crazy to suggest that, oh, well, it originated in the exact town where they have the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Maybe that's, like, if it was just going to happen in a wet market, there's wet markets in lots of places. I think Occam's razor always lended itself towards at least acknowledging the possibility that it might have something to do with the Institute of Virology that's right there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just put two and two together. But the idea that suggesting that was racist and that saying that a Chinese person ate a bat and that's what caused it wasn't racist, that's so ridiculous to me. They've never, by the way, ever identified a single animal they've been able to point to as like the animal that would have launched all of this. But what we have now been able to point to is the person who it first originated in, patient zero, if you will. And it turns out that is a scientist named Ben Hu, who, as it turns out, was working in the Wuhan lab specifically on coronaviruses, and he had received funding through the NIH/Eco Health Alliance specifically to carry out gain-of-function research on these viruses. So this is the groundbreaking news that we are really bringing you today. It is accumulation of information that we've been sort of gathering for some time. It's just slowly dripping out. And interestingly enough, like over the past year and a half, like I said, you saw the mainstream media start to back off, calling people racist for suggesting this. And then they had to basically start editing their pieces and admit that gain of function was happening in the lab. You saw the NIH try to change the website language to redefine what gain of function research is to try to get out of the hot seat on this. And now, of course, you've had several departments within the U.S. government itself come out and say this is the most likely origin. The majority of Americans now believe this is the most likely origin. And we've basically just been continuing to push for information that would conclusively show if this started in the lab, and if it did start in the lab, was it due to practices that we were funding, which I would think absolutely every person would have an interest in knowing once and for all so that those responsible could be held accountable, but even more importantly, to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Why
And
wouldn't you want to know, right? There's been so much pushback to this, and it's like, why is everyone so? And to be honest, I think it has to do, um, I think it, well, I think it has to do in part with politics, the politicization of it. It's like if if it could be blamed on the Chinese Communist Party or the Wuhan lab or Dr. Fauci or anything like that, then they couldn't blame it on Trump
yeah,
for how he was handling it. And it just wouldn't be the neat partisan football that they thought it was. So maybe that was something to do with why they were so resistant of this.
yeah. I mean, I certainly think, especially in 2020, you had the election going on. They were at a fever pitch trying to blame this on Trump, trying to blame it on red states, right? Like red states were really condemned for the way they were handling this versus blue states, and they were getting their grandmas killed, and it was immediately politicized. But I think the deeper reason for why this happened is that if you admit that likely this did come from a lab and you start following the money, it was always going to lead back to Dr. Anthony Fauci himself. And I think, it's hard to even now overstate what Fauci became to the left. He became the embodiment, the figurehead of their religion, which I think is a devout faith in government. And so
And
for him
experts
to,
and bureaucrats.
yeah, like the whole kind of industry of experts and scientists, and like, we believe in the science and health, and like, no, you don't. You were never following the science. And that's been apparent on a numerous number of issues under COVID.
Also,
But
like the science is a myth. Like science is an
yeah,
ongoing debate and process of discovery.
exactly. So I think it was that. I think it was, I think it was locking arms to protect their people, to protect their institutions, to protect their rabid faith in the government. And if the government itself is responsible for illegally funding animal torture that created the worst pandemic of our lifetimes, that got millions of people killed and shut down the global economy, God, it would almost seem like maybe government's bad. Maybe taxpayer dollars should be much more restricted. Maybe everything you believe in is wrong. That's why I think you saw the intense pressure to cover this up, even to pressure social media companies to prevent people like you and I from even
Well,
suggesting
it's
some of
funny
this.
too, like Fauci was out there for a long time dismissing this theory. And then they would use Fauci saying it's not possible or not likely as their fact check. And it's like, well, hang on. That would seem to be a slightly biased party. And Fauci also, the other thing is his position changed over time. And even he later admitted it was possible and it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It could be the case. And so even he was forced to admit it. So it always seemed that they would cite the government experts who could potentially be implicated by the theory as the refutation of the theory they needed to justify censoring it from Facebook or like media companies to call it misinformation and do fact checks of it. And they never seemed to realize that they weren't like fact checking it with some objective source, but they were rather fact checking it with the analysis from parties involved in possibly involved, I should say, in the dispute itself. So it seemed like the debate was always closed off or kind of rigged from the beginning, and only through sheer force of interest in the story and independent media and places like White Coat Waste was it forcibly opened. And then they couldn't stop it as hard as they tried. They couldn't stop it from getting out to the public.
Right. But I think without those two things, Rand Paul and the White Coat Waste Project getting the information, and then Rand Paul questioning Fauci officially in congressional committees on this, I don't know that we would have been able to overcome everything they were doing to prevent this information from getting out. Even if we had it, they had successfully labeled anybody who brought it up as a conspiracy theorist, as a nut, as somebody who shouldn't be trusted. And so having those two entities, back it up with facts, and then Rand as a credible sitting U.S. senator and a doctor consistently pressure Fauci on the truth. I think those are the things that really started to turn the tide on behalf of the everyday American people. And now, to be clear, they still have not released the vast majority of the documentation they have on COVID-19 within the federal government. Many people have been pushing for this. Congress has demanded that the Biden administration turn over the records they have by June 17th, which has passed. I'm pretty sure they
And
did
they're
not
not.
do it.
Yeah, they're not doing it.
And Rand has basically said that he is going to hold up future Biden appointees. He's not going to allow nominations to go through until they do release these documents. Let's roll this clip from him briefly on this.
Years now, I've been For several years now, I've been requesting unclassified records from HHS and from NIH concerning gain-of-function research. The FBI has concluded, as well as the Department of Energy has concluded, that the virus originated in the lab in Wuhan. Yesterday, they revealed the names of 3 scientists who they believe actually one of the scientists was patient 0, the first person to get COVID, indicating that the pandemic started in the lab. I met with the chairman in January of this year to ask his help, mainly because the administration, like the previous administration, has said they will not honor any request for records from individual senators, only from chairmen. Well, on our side are all Democrats, and we haven't had a lot of luck. Until I have better luck trying to get some of this unclassified material or having any kind of letters to help me get the material, I will join the chairman in blocking the NIH, or blocking all nominees, as he's vowed to do. I'll also will be opposing unanimous consent for any bills out of this committee until we get some help with retrieving. Taxpayers fund this research. We should be able to see the research that our government does that we funded. There is nothing classified about this, but they will not give it to us. We've discovered that at least one scientific project, which wasn't funded by DARPA, actually would have created a virus that looks a lot like what COVID-19 ended up looking like. We think they did that research even without the DARPA money, but we'd like to know if there's other grants that were granted, either domestically or in foreign, that are at risk for creating viruses that could create another pandemic. But I'd be willing to work with the chairman if he will, at some point, look at some of our letters that we've asked for request of records. Thank you.
So, look, we have taxpayer dollars at stake here, right? We just want to know what happened. We've got big consequences at stake in the future for this kind of research if it went wrong. Why won't Democrats play ball? Why won't they help us declassify or get access to this information?
I think the only reasonable explanation is they are still complicit in trying to cover up the government's role in this. As he says, he drops a couple bombshells in this clip. One, both Trump administration and Biden administration had this requirement and were sort of steamrolling this kind of access to information. 2, these are not classified documents. 3, this is something taxpayers funded. They should be able to see what's going on. And additionally, he points out that by all intents and purposes, from what we do have, it looks like we are still carrying out this kind of thing in other places. So we are at risk. We are at risk right now. And Democrats are like, sorry, not going to help. Got to protect our reputation. Like, what is wrong with them? I mean, I think this is abhorrent. And I can't fathom being a Democrat, like grassroots person, and not being outraged at that kind of behavior. Like, you are more loyal to protecting federal bureaucrats who are breaking the law and torturing animals and who maybe got millions of people killed and who might get millions and more people killed. You're more worried about protecting them than you are actually serving the people and ensuring Americans are safe.
I think it is a function of negative polarization, in that a negative polarization is this idea that, like, when the people you hate, like despise, when they believe something or advocate for something, you hate it by default. Because it's like, well, they like it and I hate them, so I must hate that. And we see this on both sides all the time as America becomes more polarized. And I think that any idea that's associated with Republicans or Trump or MAGA is something that lots of these people just have to hate and they just have to think is bad. We see this sometimes with, Republicans. Any idea, even broken clocks are right twice a day, right? And there are some things Fauci says that are true. And they'll still won't believe them or won't accept them because they are so negatively polarized against him. I think that's what's happening here, is just that Democrats are being tribal, like so many people in our politics are. And they're saying, well, if those people I don't like are pushing this and saying it must not be true, I couldn't even possibly admit that they're right, because if I admit they might be right about this, then what else might they be right about that invalidates my agenda and my deeply held beliefs that I've constructed my identity around? I think that's why it's so hard to have an open and honest debate and conversation about this, is because for people like you and I who don't really have that much loyalty to either side of these things, we can kind of wade through it honestly. But if you are wrapped up in defending your team or your side, it's much harder to actually be open and discover truth.
I think that's very fair, but at this point, the jig really is up. Now, I do wonder to what extent people outside our echo chambers are totally aware of this, because I looked for some mainstream media coverage of this story. I wanted to play some video, and I didn't see anything from like CNN, even Fox. I didn't see it. I do have a little bit of specific reporting from The Intercept I want to read, just so people know I'm not just sitting here making all this up or exaggerating exactly what we have. So The Intercept did have a really good write-up on this, and they said one of the first Wuhan researchers reportedly sickened with COVID in fall 2019, Ben Hu, was getting U.S. financial support for risky gain-of-function research on coronaviruses, according to documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by the transparency advocacy organization White Coat Waste Project. The funding came in 3 grants totaling $41 million, doled out by the USAID and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, which is specifically Fauci's branch of the NIH. Who is listed as an investigator on the grant. So we have documentation showing patient zero was getting these funds. They went on to say the news that U.S. intelligence has learned that the 3 Wuhan Institute of Virology lab workers have been hospitalized with COVID-19 symptoms in November of 2019, significantly before the outbreak at the city's seafood market, was first reported by the Wall Street Journal in May of 2021. But the revelation had curiously little impact, because it was being censored, on the broader debate over the origin of the pandemic, even as it would invalidate, if confirmed, the claim that the pandemic originated at the wholesale seafood market. They said no such animal has been identified, but new reporting by Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, sourced to 3 government sources familiar with a State Department investigation into COVID's origins, has identified the 3 lab workers as Ben Hu, Yu Ping, and Yan Zhu. The NIAID and USAID grants list Hu as an investigator in the projects being funded, who is a top deputy to Shi Zhengli, known in the virology world as Batwoman, for her work extracting samples of viruses from bats in Chinese caves. The FOIA documents were first obtained by White Coat Waste in 2021, but given new relevance with the reporting of Hu's involvement. So that's kind of how things are getting pieced together.
So let me get this straight, Hannah. Gain-of-function research is experimenting on viruses to make them more contagious or more deadly or whatever, making them worse. We were funding gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab. And the scientists involved in that research are the patient zeros. They are the first people who we know of that had COVID.
Yes, and specifically, they were being funded to carry out gain-of-function research on coronaviruses.
How much more, I get that it's hard to know these things conclusively because China tried to cover it up and they've been the opposite of transparent and opaque. But how much more smoking of a gun can you get?
That's kind of my point here. I don't understand why there's still this belief, it seems, that you're going to get away with it. The conspiracy theorists, quote, we've won. We've been right every step of the way. We've won. Battle's over. You're going down. You can either play ball and it sure doesn't happen again, or that's going to be your Scarlet A you wear around for the rest of your life. So get with the program, people. I mean, honestly, it really does make me angry that there's not a lockstep demand from Congress to get these records. Now, there have been a few actions taken that I do think are encouraging. Like I said, the Congress is pushing for the release of the documents. They're going to have to now figure out what they do since they aren't giving them to them. Rand, of course, is continuing to really stand in the gap. And White Coat Waste has continued to lobby both for final answers on COVID's origins, but also on defunding gain-of-function research altogether in foreign labs. And they've gotten some good traction. So the NIH recently, after immense public pressure, has, and literally just in 2023, said it will stop funding the Wuhan lab, which is, something.
Why did that take this long?
Yeah. And as of this month, the U.S. House panel that funds the Department of Defense, this is another thing you should know. It was not just NIH funding Wuhan, and it's not just NIH funding all these other foreign labs that are doing exactly the same thing. It was multiple divisions of the government. It's just that the specific grants that are leading to the origins we think are coming out of the NIH, but the Pentagon's been giving them money. Department of Defense has given them money. State Department has given them money. There's a lot of people involved in this. So basically, the House panel that funds the Department of Defense passed its 2024 spending bill, and it includes key language, which White Coat Waste lobbied for, that cuts DoD funding to the Wuhan lab, as well as all other labs in China, Russia, and other adversarial nations. Additionally, it also cuts DoD funding for any animal experiments, virus hunting, or other products in China involving the corrupt pass-through organization Fauci favored for years, Echo Health Alliance. So to be clear, that is a drop in the bucket for what needs to happen, but it is something, I guess. We are getting some progress. And I think what comes next is Americans need to raise hell. You really need to raise hell about this. You need to demand answers. And I think we need to demand gain-of-function research be banned again, and that there actually are consequences for people if there is a ban and they violate that. Because I think one of the most infuriating circumstances in all of this is people like me and a lot of other people. I think Anthony Fauci should be in jail if it's proven that we did create this virus and it leaked. I think he should be in jail for illegally funding gain-of-function research with our tax dollars. That won't happen because there's no recourse. There's no charge we could bring against him. As you and I have talked about, I think the best they could maybe do is get him for lying to Congress about some of this. But we need to ensure that Congress starts putting some teeth in some of this, that when federal bureaucrats do obviously break the law, that there is actual accountability and repercussions for that the American people have some ability to actually hold people responsible for those kinds of actions. And currently we just lack that on so many faces.
Hey guys, Brad here. I just want to make sure you're staying in the loop on all things space politics. We've also got 2 new shows you should check out. One is my new show, Damage Control, where I'm teaming up with right-of-center LGBT guests to restore sanity on these increasingly unhinged issues. Then there's Hannah's show, Propaganda, where she's reacting to videos of police brutality and exposing the systemic flaws in the U.S. criminal justice system. Check these all out on our individual Facebook and YouTube pages. And remember, Base Politics is a nonprofit organization, so you can help us move the culture through content by going to base-politics.com and donating today. So on a little bit of a lighter note, let's shift gears and talk about Juneteenth. Juneteenth was yesterday, or I guess Monday by the time you guys hear this. It was June 19th, and it is a holiday that was recently made a federal holiday, but has been celebrated for a long time, honoring a landmark day in the end of slavery. Take a listen to this History.com video explaining the origins of Juneteenth.
Tomorrow is Juneteenth in Texas. Some of you may wonder, what exactly is that? Well, it commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Union Army General Gordon Granger stood on the balcony of the Ashton Villa in Galveston and said, in part, in accordance with a proclamation, all slaves are free. He was referring to President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that was issued in January of 1863. So why did it take so long for word to reach slaves in Texas? Texas, remember, was part of the Confederacy, and the war didn't end until April of 1865. So until the Union Army arrived in Galveston 2 months later, slaves there weren't aware of the proclamation. And until the war was over, the proclamation was meaningless. In 1866, former Texas slaves began celebrating Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day, a celebration that continues to this very day.
So to me, this is just objectively about as uncontroversial a thing as you can get, right? It's who doesn't want to celebrate the effective end of slavery? Because like they mentioned, the Emancipation Proclamation was a great start, but took a long time to be realized. And so this is the day 2 years later when these slaves in Galveston, Texas actually got to hear this message. And it's been a really important day in the Black community for a long time. Texas has celebrated it for decades, and it's recently become a national level holiday and a official federal holiday. And I think it's great. I mean, I think it's one of I love America. I love what we were founded upon, but slavery's always been the biggest stain on not living up to our values. So why wouldn't we want to celebrate something like this? I've always thought it was great.
I mean, for me, I think more holidays are always a good idea. And anytime that we live up to our values, anytime we actually get wins for limited government, for individual liberty, I think that's something to celebrate. So I did not grow up knowing about Juneteenth. I probably heard about it 2 or 3 years ago, like most other Americans. But I think it's something, kind of regional and cool that's been elevated. And I'm, like you said, I think probably a lot of people in the Black community were more familiar with it before. So I can't I don't know why this would become politicized. Like, I would think if Americans can agree on anything, it's that ending slavery was a huge achievement, not just in the US, but globally. I think a lot of people forget, like, slavery is still a global practice and was very prominent at the time we ended slavery. So awful we ever had it, but also revolutionary that we started turning the tide against it throughout human history. Like, so why would we not celebrate that?
So you'd think this would be uncontroversial, but of course, some reactionary people, in this case, right-wingers, had to be up in arms and get angry about it, including Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA, one of the most simplistic and trite people on Twitter. He tweeted, "You should be working today, not taking today off for a critical race theory inspired federal holiday that competes with July 4th. And
Compete?
of course, Candace Owens, the Daily Wire host and Black conservative commentator, tweeted, "Juneteenth is still ghetto and made up. Hope everyone enjoys it." So why do these people have to be just objectively against anything? So, for example, like Biden made this an official federal holiday. And it feels like anything that Democrats like, they just have to be against, even when it's something that everyone should support, like celebrating the end of slavery.
That, and also, even though Candace is Black, I've never seen her say anything nice about Black people ever, ever, ever. She really seems to absolutely hate her own race. So I'm not surprised to hear her attacking a holiday that's important to Black people, because homegirl just has utter distaste for the Black community. And it's really sad to watch. She's a very grotesque commentator. But I mean, for Charlie, I think, he's a little bit more in the realm of, like, he just says whatever he thinks boomers will like. I mean, that's really the only way to explain Charlie Kirk, is he's like, how do I get the elder white men in the Republican Party, like, really turned on? I know. Like, I'm just going to go after anything that's new, anything Biden does. And I mean, they're nothing more than shock jocks. We used to have shock jocks on the radio.
Just on Charlie specifically, he is so transparently fake in his outrage about this. Let me read you what he tweeted in 2020. "Today is Juneteenth, celebrating the end of slavery in the United States. This was made possible thanks to Republican President Abraham Lincoln. Today, Democrats are fighting to tear down his statue." So a couple years ago, before Biden embraced it, he was positive towards Juneteenth. And now, of course, it's bad because
Is this because Trump liked Juneteenth?
But Trump also liked Juneteenth. That's the thing.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If Trump liked it, that's why Charlie Kirk liked it.
He's
just a follower.
He's just a grift. It's just an pandering to outrage. And a couple of the actual arguments that are being made here. One is, I think the only legitimate thing is, I think that if it was going to be added as a federal holiday, they should have taken another one away, because they have almost 4-day work weeks at this point on average for the federal workforce. So I would have liked them to see them take away a different holiday. But the arguments are that it's inspired by critical race theory, which is a noxious left-wing, race-obsessed, victimhood-obsessed political theory, and or that it competes with July 4th. And I think both of these arguments are wrong. It doesn't compete with July 4th. They've celebrated it in Texas for decades. And guess what? They still get down on July 4th. I think we can acknowledge both things. And acknowledging a specific day that's important to Black independence doesn't change America's independence story. I think they can totally coexist. And then the idea that it's like a CRT thing, I really don't think that's true, because CRT posits that, like, America is systemically racist and inherently
never does anything good,
bad, and just all this stuff that, if anything, Juneteenth is like a celebration of equality under the law, of progress, of these kinds of things that CRT wants to tell us aren't real or aren't possible or even racist themselves. Colorblindness is racist is a CRT inspired idea. And it just seems to me so far-fetched. It's like they're just, anything that's woke is bad, and they just think anything libs like is woke at this point. It just seems to me they've turned off their thinking brains.
I just think it's inexcusable to be this wrong on Twitter when you have Google. I mean, do basic Google searches before you tweet. Obviously, this has nothing to do with CRT. This is something that's been going on for decades. And I think, I often hear people on the left say that when people use woke, that it's a code word, basically meaning like they don't like Black people or Black people things. And I usually push back on that. But in this instance, I think they have a point. Like, I think this is kind of coded. Like, you just don't like it because it pertains to Black people, plain and simple. Like, I think that that's rapidly apparent in this kind of discourse. There's no reason to dislike. I mean, to say it competes with July 4th, like, what are you running short on red Solo cups, Charlie? Like, come on. Like, I mean, it's utterly absurd. You can celebrate multiple things. And honestly, if you don't want to celebrate it, again, I think that speaks volumes about you. But if you really don't want to, why do you still the need to come on and criticize it and try to malign it and put it down or call it ghetto? Like, again, I just think it's very dog
What
whistle.
is ghetto about ending slavery and celebrating
Because it has Black people involved, Brad, and she hates Black people.
Her
Like,
brand
I mean,
is literally just anything that most Black Americans support or agree with is bad, and I disagree with it. That is her brand.
I'm not being disingenuous. I'm online very heavily. I have never seen her say something nice about Black people as a whole. Literally.
I mean, she probably has somewhere once or twice.
Maybe somewhere. We'd have to search pretty hard for it. But yeah, I'm not somebody who rushes to call things racist ever. But to me, this just comes across as like, you don't like Black people. And I don't know how else anybody else would read this or see it. Like, it just gives that look. And it's really gross. And I really think to like older boomers who support people like this speaking for the conservative movement, you need to be real cautious because you're going to die off and you really need to be attracting younger people to free market capitalism and limited government if you want this country to be much longer. But they're not going to come if it's packaged with crap like this.
People like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens are a meme. They are a laughingstock among Gen Z. They are not taken seriously, yet they make their money off of Republican donors and conservative movement donors who think they're like the future and that young people like them. And no, all their engagement is from boomers. The whole thing is, but this example is just so obviously tribal and dumb that it's just a good example of their whole grift in general.
Well, here at Base Politics, we love Juneteenth. We love celebrating freedom. So I hope you guys enjoyed the holiday. And now we need to move on to our quick takes. Hey guys, Hannah here. Big things are happening at Base Politics, and we want to make sure you stay in the loop with all of our productions and developments. If you like the Base Politics podcast, you can find it every Wednesday morning on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Brad's YouTube. If you want to support the show, be sure to join the Base Politics Locals channel where you can help produce it for only $5 a month. You can also catch our new shows, Propaganda and Damage Control, every Saturday on our respective YouTubes and Facebook channels. On Damage Control, Brad teams up with right-of-center LGBT guests to restore sanity to the increasingly unhinged debate over these issues. And on Propaganda, I'm taking video footage of police behaving badly every week and using those videos to expose problems within U.S. policing and the laws that guide it. Remember, Base Politics is a nonprofit organization dedicated to moving the culture through content. If you want to be a part of these efforts, you can donate to fund our work at base-politics.com.
All right, well, we've got to catch up with my fave, my problematic fave, Michael Knowles, my buddy, the Daily Wire host and commentator, conservative commentator, who just keeps getting more and more extreme with his takes. He's now said that he doesn't want to return to the social mores of 2010. He doesn't want to return to the social mores of 1995, not even 1950. He wants society to go all the way back to the level of social values that we had in the year 1200. You can't make that up. Kind of reads like a Babylon Bee headline, but it's what he said. Take a listen to this clip.
Americans are as conservative today as they were back in 2012, which is fine, and it's a good start given how much more liberal the country had become since 2012. But if 2012 is the end point, then we might as well pack it in, guys. I do not want America to be as socially conservative as it was in 2012. I want our civilization to be as socially conservative as we were in 1220, okay? Forget it. I don't even want the 1950s. I don't even want the 1880s. I want 1220. I think that would be a good spot to land at. At the very least, I think we ought to be as conservative as we were before all the modern ideologies started corroding our civilization. Because that's been the big problem. The reason that a lot of people for a long time became more socially conservative, more open, more tolerant, is because they had the pillars of our civilization to rely upon: the church, the family, the productivity, the political order, the institutions, the system of law. We had all of that to rely upon. And so we were just leaning on that while we were indulging in an ideology that was eroding all of that. This is the thing about liberalism, including the old classical liberalism. It's just like an acid that you pour onto your civilization. And I don't know, maybe you like it. Maybe it's like lysergic acid, maybe it's like a drug or something. People kind of like this acid for a while, but it just starts to eat away at the thing upon which it must rest.
So, I mean, I don't know that we have enough time to talk about all the ways in which this is just cracked.
Catholics need to come get their trads. These people are nuts. Like, what marker does he even have for 1220? Like, I can't identify anything in
You
history.
pull that out of a hat, like.
What? Like, I just think it's shock jock BS. Like, I mean, some of these people are just so apparently desperate for clicks and attention that I just think they'll say anything. Like, this isn't really grounded in anything. I mean,
are we really supposed to? Is he really saying look, I get it. He's against gay marriage, whatever, yada, yada, yada. Against women not being property, against women not being able to vote. Is he against civil rights, against integration, against ending slavery? I mean,
I don't know what else it could mean, because if you say like you want people to be more socially conservative and you think about that means like you want traditional households, marriages, and you're going to take it back to 1220, like, yeah, I would absolutely think that would mean you don't want people to have equal rights. You don't want there to be interracial marriages. You don't want women to be able to work.
You don't want religious freedom. You want like theocracy. You want this oppressive feudalistic system. I mean, he's like, go back to the productivity. Excuse me? That was before the exponential growth in human progress that capitalism wrought. The feudal decades, or the feudal centuries, were of stagnation and growth and massive death and childhood mortality and maternal mortality and all these terrible things. I mean, there's this weird fetishization of like medieval society by certain corners of the trad internet, and it's like, you probably would have died of some now cured disease by like age 20. The life expectancy was what, several decades. Like, it's just crazy. And I'm old enough to remember when American conservatives were patriots who loved America and were like, rah America. And he's like, let's go back to before America existed. Like, what?
And before capitalism existed. I mean, this is just, I mean, when you really start to unpack it, like, it is some shock jock material, but I feel like it is a bit sinister. I really am curious, how bad are these people's lives going where they need to prevent their wife from being able to divorce them? They need to be able to like beat her. They need to be able to like prevent anybody around them from being with people of the same sex. Like, if your life is so bad, you're so bothered by these things, I really feel sorry for you. Like, this is bleak. It's weird. And I don't know how anybody could have any sort of fascination or longing for feudal times.
Who is the audience for this?
I don't know who his audience is, period, if I'm being honest. Like, I've never met someone who's like, I love Michael Knowles.
He has at least 20 times as many YouTube subscribers as I do. So
yeah, they also spent millions of dollars to make him a name. So
they did, yes. But
I mean, yeah, you can make a turd have 1 million followers if you just put a bunch of money behind it. Like, it's not that impressive to me. Anyways, I think this is gross. I think like this, but this is sort of like the extreme of where the trad views go, like this weird.
And we should say, not all, so many social conservatives and Christians and trads are not like this.
No, but I'm saying the very online people who are like, I'm trad, those people, which I've made the point many times. I grew up trad as they come. I know the trads. I grew up with people who believed like the Duggars do, that you had to have as many kids as you could. Like, several of the families we were close with had like 6, 7 kids in them. Like, I grew up trad. None of those people thought or acted like this, right? They actually still had great respect for their wives, treated them very well. They believed in America. They believed in the Constitution. They believed in capitalism. They didn't believe that you needed to strip people of their free will or their rights, that people could opt into those kinds of lives if they wanted to. Like, But the very online trad community is a different beast. I don't think most of them even do like actually live out their trad fantasies or like fetishes. They just have this like real desire to oppress people, and they mask it sort of under this trad banner.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but there's just a whole lot of crazy on display there, and I can't imagine it's sincere, and if it is, that's actually more concerning. All right, well, let's move on to our next subject, which is a return to the debate over masking toddlers, because Democrats are out here in June 2023 still saying that forcibly masking 2-year-olds was not only the right call, but that if you didn't do it, if you disagreed with it, that was child abuse.
What?
First, yeah, I know. First up, we had this really revealing and gaslighting exchange between a Republican congressman and Biden's Secretary of Health and Human Services. Take a listen.
Mr. Secretary, did forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks save lives?
Do what now?
Did forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks save lives?
Making sure people wore masks when it was appropriate was essential to make sure that we were able to get out of this pandemic.
Sure, but that wasn't my question. Could you answer the question that I asked?
Which is?
Did forcing 2-year-olds to wear masks save lives?
And who did the forcing?
Well, your department, or the Head Start, which is under your department, had a mask mandate until late last year for 2-year-olds and above, even outdoors. So can you point to any public health benefit of that policy?
Right. We never forced anyone to do anything because we don't have the jurisdiction or authority to do that. What we did was provide guidance on what would be
Mr. Secretary, did Head Start have a mask mandate?
We provide a mask mandate, a requirement for jurisdictions that wish to receive money to provide particular services.
So Head Start did have a mask mandate for kids, yes?
We had a mask mandate for for agencies that wish to get federal dollars.
So that's a yes. So
services.
can you point to any benefit,
not a yes to
any
your
public
question.
health benefit from that policy, whether it was recommended or enforced or forced, of requiring young children to wear masks?
Did families benefit from the policy of using all protection, all precautions to avoid
No, I'm not asking you to
contracting COVID?
rephrase my
Yes.
question as some abstract question that you'd rather answer. I'm asking that you, as the person who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, right now, can you point to any evidence that there was a public health benefit to forcing young children to wear masks?
Well, the fact that today we are not losing lives the way we lost them when we first got into this pandemic.
And you think that's
is a
because we
clear
forced
sign.
2-year-olds to wear masks?
That's your interpretation. What I'm saying to you is that using good policies that give us the precautions to keep our families from contracting COVID are helping save lives.
I want to quote you from an article from NPR in January of 2022. It says, the United States is an outlier in recommending masks from the age of 2 years old. The World Health Organization does not recommend masks for children under age 5, while the European equivalent of the CDC doesn't recommend them for children under age 12. In retrospect, was it a mistake for the United States to defy the international norm on child masking?
The U.S. has been working closely with our international partners, and we have done more than any other country to try to help.
But that's not what I asked you. I asked you, was it a mistake
countries.
to defy the international norm on the issue of child masking?
We continue to use all the best practices when it comes to making sure people take the precautions.
Is there a reason you're not answering my question, Mr. Secretary?
I'm answering the question the best I can.
So this is like a masterclass in gaslighting, huh?
That gave me highs, but who's Kevin Kiley? That was some hot questioning. I liked it. I don't know him. That was awesome. Yes, that was so impressive to watch him take that guy down. I mean, the amount of gaslighting and just pivoting and like trying to dance around the facts, that was kind of hilarious to watch him dance, but also infuriating because I can't imagine if I had to like mask up my baby every day. And then like how he tries to deny that they forced this. Like, yes, you did force it. What are you talking about? And then he says, oh, we just wouldn't give them any funding if they didn't enforce it. Like,
and they also had so the feds literally, they had the travel mask mandate, they had the Head Start mask mandate, then they had the recommendations for state and local governments to do their own mask mandates. Yep. They tied funding to it. It's like, you absolutely did. That is, you are a liar. You are disingenuous.
The lack of intellectual humility, it's one thing to just be like, man, we were asshats and got it totally wrong. Like, sorry. But to continue to try to deny it and lie about it and misconstrue what you did and refuse to like take accountability, you don't deserve to ever be in a position of power. When you're in the position of power, the buck stops with you. The failure is on you. Man up. take responsibility, say you're sorry, issue public apologies, and ensure this kind of crap doesn't happen again. Let other people learn from your failures who come behind you. Like, this is just what a piss poor example of leadership.
Yeah, and also he's just asking you for the evidence. So if this is really such a good policy, just cite one possible benefit or defense of it. And you can't. You can't, because forcing a 2-year-old, who a healthy 2-year-old was literally never at any risk of dying from COVID-19, statistically almost zero risk. Forcing them to wear a cloth mask that they will, one, it's useless anyway, but two, they will not wear it properly. They'll pull it down, they'll sneeze on it, they'll just do, like, the whole thing was so obviously nonsensical that all they can do is gaslight. They can't even attempt a defense on the merits of what they did. And to me, that is so revealing. But Hannah, it gets way worse. That was not even the worst part of this. So then Congressman Jerry Nadler, who is one of the top Democrats in the House, he followed up this exchange in response to it by getting up there and saying that if you didn't mask your 2-year-old, that is child abuse. Take a listen to this.
Before I was allowed to go to school, I won't tell you how many years ago that was, I had to be vaccinated for diphtheria, for whooping cough, for the diseases that they then knew had to vaccinate against. Nothing has changed. We have to vaccinate people to prevent diseases and pandemics. The gentleman asked, why should a 2-year-old, well, and the fact of the matter is that people should require to be either vaccinated, especially a nurse who is dealing with patients, who is breathing on those patients. She can transmit the disease. So certainly she should be required to be vaccinated, because the vaccination not only protects her, it protects against transmission of the disease to the next person. And the healthcare worker certainly ought to be required to be vaccinated. And when we have a pandemic like COVID-19 pandemic that we had, 2-year-olds should have been required to wear masks. It would be child abuse for parents not to do that, because there was no vaccination available for 2-year-olds. And the only way to protect them against COVID was to have them wear masks. And these mandates are meant to protect the public's health and safety.
Just demented.
Rep Jerry Nadler, not hot. I like the woman sitting off camera looking at him where he's like, this was the only way to save kids' lives because there weren't vaccines. And she's like, don't lump me in with this. Like, no, sir. What a crack pipe thing to say. Like, what are you talking about? It's unbelievable to me. These people think they were following the science. It's next level.
2-year-olds were never at any risk of dying from COVID-19 unless they had some serious pre-existing health condition. And then the claim that they needed the masks to protect them. Well, even the argument for masks was never that they protect you from getting COVID. It was that it limits transmission to others in theory, like it decreases your spread in a lab setting, in a real world setting. But at least on paper, that was the theory behind it. So it was never even the N95s, they offer some degree of protection, but like the surgical and cloth masks that they were forcing people to wear, even the theory behind those masks was not that they protect the wearer, but that they protect the people around them from the spread. So forcing the 2-year-old to wear the mask never had anything to do with protecting the 2-year-old. That is gaslighting. This is fear-mongering. It is alarmism. But I also just say this, and Republicans do this too sometimes, I think we should be always very skeptical of claims of like, this is child abuse that aren't actually referring to child abuse. Like child abuse is such, and I've seen it up close just a little bit, working with kids in the past. It is such a horrific thing, physical or sexual abuse of minors, that it really shouldn't be bandied about lightly or conflated with like politics. And I hate to see that. I really do. And so anytime somebody's doing that, it's just it just rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, I just think anybody who invokes kids in politics, period, I don't take it seriously. Like, I think people just fearmonger around kids nonstop and like are constantly trying to drag kids into it. You had really bad ideas. You forced them on everybody, including kids. You were not following the science. You were not following other nations. Nobody else was doing this. Nobody else was shutting down their schools even. You were out on a limb acting freaking crazy for a politically driven agenda that had hardly anything to do with keeping people safe. You were drunk on power, and it was harmful, especially to small children who need to be able to read lips to develop their speech pathology. It is so important that they be able to look at people's lips and movement so that they can learn how to properly talk, so they can learn how to recognize facial expressions. So it's not chump change what you did. It was not grounded in anything that makes any sense. You had no excuse to do it. You were absolutely in the wrong. And the fact that you still can't admit it, I just think so lowly of these people. All right. Well, we have to turn our attention to what appears to be a tragic situation. We are still getting information on this. It might have even updated by the time this episode airs, but there is a submarine that has gone missing that has 5 people on board, and they were going down to view the wreckage of the Titanic. This has captivated the internet. As where we're at right now, we believe that if the vessel is intact, they should have about 40 hours worth of oxygen left. So it is a ticking time clock in order to try to find them. Brad, I think you know this about me. I am a Titanic expert. I am a massive fan of Titanic, not just the movie. I wanted to see the movie when it came out as a kid. I was not allowed to see Titanic as a child because it had a naked lady in it and because they said the GD word. So
They said the what word?
The GD word.
What word is that?
I'm not allowed to say it. I'll go to hell.
Oh.
GD, God.
Oh, wow. Scandalous.
Yeah, so I was not allowed to see it. I wasn't allowed to have a Heart of the Ocean necklace. This was everything when I was 8. Like it was Titanic mania. So instead, I began reading books on Titanic, and I read everything I could find. I was very mentally captivated by the entire story. So you can ask me anything. I know everything. But a few years ago, they started doing these voyages down to the Titanic. I think it was in 2012 or 13. Why do I know this? Because I would give my right arm to go down and see the Titanic. But it has always been a very, very expensive excursion. The tickets are about $250,000 per person. So the average person cannot access this kind of thing. And that's because it's actually quite dangerous to go down and see Titanic. There's a reason it took them so many decades to find it. It sunk in 1912. I think it was somewhere in like 70s or 80s. I can't believe I don't know this anymore, but somewhere in there that they actually discovered the wreckage. And that's because it's so deep. It's like 2.5 miles down over 12,000 feet at the bottom of the ocean. It's in very, very cold waters. And it also, like, where they're at, there's a lot of water vortexes that could like pull your vessel in. So it's risky to go down and see it. And that's why adventure tourism to the Titanic really just started in the past decade. So it's been kind of quietly going on beneath the surface, pun intended. But this has blown up the conversation around it. And it's really not looking good so far. So let's roll this news clip on what's going on with the submarine.
This urgent search and rescue operation is underway. What are you thinking?
I'm not optimistic.
A British explorer and a father and son are among the 5 people still feared missing on a tourist submarine that disappeared in the Atlantic Ocean during a dive to see the Titanic's wreck. Brit billionaire Hamish Harding and UK-based father and son Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman Dawood were all on board the submarine-like vessel taking paying tourists to view the famous wreck 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. The US Coast Guard are in a race against time to find the OceanGate Expedition's vessel, which may just have 50 to 70 hours of air left and was just above the shipwreck when communications went down.
So, Hannah, look, my heart goes out to these people. I fear the worst, but I think it is just so tragic and sad. It's a nightmare. But all I can say is this. I'm not a huge Titanic fan, but even if I was, I would not have stepped foot in this death trap of a thing. It's not even really a submarine. I mean...
Yeah. That's okay. So this is where the story gets crazier because all weekend I was hearing, or I guess not weekend, but the past like 2 days, I've been hearing reports that this was a submarine that's missing. But then I was on TikTok last night. It's all anybody can talk about. And I saw a video showing this vessel they were on. And Brad, I don't think it is intellectually honest to call this a submarine. It is like...
It's like a pod.
It's a little blimp. It's a little underwater balloon blimp is what it looks like.
And they're taking this miles down into the ocean, miles.
Also, so I know this is kind of like basic info probably, but just to make sure people understand, when you're going 2.5 miles under the ocean, the pressure is so intense. Like it would crush you to pieces if you were just out floating in that. So the density down there. So this is like, when I saw this, I was like, who in the world would take this down to the Titanic? Like, I'm pretty sure the Coast Guard doesn't even have the capability to go down and see the Titanic. It is not easy to get down to this depth. Again, that's why it took so long to find this thing. And that's why it's really scary for these people, because the likelihood that anybody else is going to be able to find them is pretty slim, because there's not even that many things that can get down to that level where they were at. And we do know they were right above the actual ship when they lost communication. So they were really far down there. I want to play this TikTok. Audio listeners, I understand that you like listening on audio. I'm telling you, you need to go watch this part of the video for our show, because you have to see this thing. We're going to try to describe it to you, but the jankiness of this, why was it $250,000 to take this thing down? I have so many questions, but let's roll this clip.
An experimental submersible vessel that has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma, or death. Where do I sign?
Oh, take your shoes off. That's customary.
Okay. Wow.
Inside, the sub has about as much room as a minivan.
So this is not your grandfather's submersible. We only have one button. That's it. It should be like an elevator. You know, it shouldn't take a lot of skill.
The Titan is the only 5-person sub in the world that can reach Titanic depths, 2.4 miles below the sea. It's also the only one with a toilet, sort of. And yet, I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of this sub seemed improvised.
We can use these off-the-shelf components. I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Come on! It seems like...
Okay, so if you didn't see the video that we just watched, you guys, it is such a small space that if there are 5 adults in that space, I would think they would be like on each other's lap. You could not stand up. You would have to sit or maybe lay down, but I don't think there's room for that. There is one button that they say works like an elevator. The thing can go up and down. That's it. The control that they show for it, that they are using, it looks like it is attached. It looks like an Xbox controller. That is what this technology looks like that these people are down there in. I cannot fathom getting in this thing to go down 2.5 miles in the ocean. Just, it gives me claustrophobia even thinking about it. That means these people definitely can't go to the bathroom. They can't move. Like, if they are still alive, the conditions right now are heinous. It's just a really tragic situation. And because of all these factors, I don't really have a lot of hope that they're going to be recovered. I hope I'm wrong, but this looks really bad. And man, I can't imagine these people's families thinking about them in that kind of space. Ugh.
No, it's horrifying. Like when he's like, it's like an elevator with one button. They shouldn't be. Nope, absolutely not. No, thank you. Now, look, I don't want to like victim blame these people. It's a tragedy. I feel so bad for them. It's not their fault at all. But I would never have gotten on that. I don't think they should have. When he's like, it's not certified by any regulator and you may die. Sign here. Like, no, I personally, not for me. But I think what was more disturbing to me, and I know the internet isn't representative of most people, but just like the trash takes floating around from like leftists or socialists who were, obviously this is like extreme adventure tourism. So let me just read you a tweet from a left-wing writer that's gone viral and has millions of views. A sub went missing full of people who paid $160,000 to $200,000 to take a tour of the Titanic wreckage. The ocean is just eating the rich for us these days. Oh my goodness. I mean, to say basically celebrating the death of rich people, like it's funny just because you are so really infected with class envy and hatred. I mean, you need to touch grass. You need to reevaluate. It's a really horrible thing to do. We're all human. We all have loved ones. Everyone's life matters. Poor, rich, black, white, gay, straight, whatever. And so I hate this. I hate this kind of class warfare that dehumanizes others.
I think communists continue to bat 100 at one thing and one thing alone, and that is being the most vile and inhumane people you'll ever come across. Like, you are so greedy yourself. You are so envious yourself of other people that you would wish death on somebody because they're richer than you. You would celebrate their death. You would mock it because they have more than you. You're a trash human being. And the fact that you're going to come advertise that publicly online, I would think if I was a trash human being, I would want to keep that to myself. But nope, here they are, loud and proud. That same person went on to say that they do genuinely feel bad for the crew. It's terrible they were forced to do a job to cater to billionaires. The Titanic tourist industry would simply not exist without the demand of an upper class. I disagree. I am not upper class, and I would absolutely pay to go down and see the Titanic. Like, I don't know. This is just...
Although they weren't forced to, they probably really thought it was cool and chose to do that. I'm sure there's a million lines of work they could have gone into. And if you're like...
Yeah. No, the people that are down there actually, like, it's not like just this, like, $15 an hour, like, minimum wage workers steering the ship. Like, they are people with, like, vast military careers in the Navy and, like, experience and technology. So these are highly trained, probably pretty successful people themselves. But I mean, yeah, I think this is absolutely grotesque. And if you really find yourself getting to this point in life, like, go do a cleanse. Go cleanse whatever evil spirit you got, because it's not normal to have this sort of reaction to this. I don't care how much money somebody has when tragedy befalls them. How does your mind go to that place? Yeah, but we've got even worse, I think, right? There's more, yeah. So another person said, I'm conflicted on the submarine thing between wanting to laugh at what an obviously janky death trap it is on one hand, and on the other, solemn reverence for the unfathomable terror that several real people are experiencing at this very moment, assuming they're still alive. I don't know why you want to laugh. Like, it's not...
I don't have the urge to laugh, personally.
No, not at all. And then somebody replied to them and said, okay, but look at this guy. How am I not supposed to mock his death? And they posted a link to a BBC news article on one of the people aboard, who is British adventurer Hamish Harding. It's vile.
And then it gets worse. It actually gets worse.
Well, yeah. And all right. So the original person responds to that and says, because he is a human being experiencing mortal terror. And someone said he's a billionaire, not a human.
That is the most, and let me even say this, most socialists would disavow this, but that is the most extreme class warfare and envy. That is where it takes you, to the point where you dehumanize your fellow citizens because they are well off and you are not. And that's why class envy is, in my opinion, such a toxic thing to let infect your brain.
It's an inherent part of communism, and it's why communism has killed more people than all other mentalities known to man. This philosophy has led to the death of hundreds of millions of people. It is a vile, toxic, disgusting ideology, and it is predicated on this very sentiment of having to hate people who have more than you and thinking it is okay to enjoy them being robbed or even killed because of those crimes. That's what it boils down to. So I'm not surprised to see communists behaving this way online, but man, do people need to see them for what they are. All right, guys, we talked a lot this week and we're running over on time, so we're going to have to skip our mailbag and move on to hot takes. Brad, what do you have for the week?
Okay, so I'm just going to echo a YouTube comment I saw about people who use non-binary pronouns sometimes. So you'll see this, where somebody will have their pronouns be she/they or he/they. This grinds my gears because it doesn't even make sense. The whole non-binary thing doesn't make sense at all, but at least they're trying, right? Whereas this does not even make sense. You're simultaneously saying, I am non-binary because I don't feel comfortable as a man or a woman, so I go by they, them. But also I'm fine with being referred to as a she. That doesn't make sense. And I think what it is, this is what this commenter said. She/they and he/they allows straight people to be LGBTQIA+ and therefore gain oppression points without actually having to stop being a man or a woman, or I would add, actually being gay. And I think that's true. And I think it's a product of the victimhood as currency aspect that the social justice culture has kind of created, that now people want to invent fake identities to like join in on the clout. And that's why you end up with these absurdities, like somebody simultaneously claiming non-binary pronouns and gendered pronouns, even though that does not make sense.
At this point, all of that kind of identitarian stuff is actually just an excuse to not do the work to build a real identity. Like you're so boring and uninteresting. You have to just make up oppression and like make up things that like actually aren't even true. And honestly, it's offensive to people who actually do deal with things and like have to worry about pronouns in society. So get a personality and stop. Okay, my hot take this week is a public formal apology. For years, I pushed Southwest on you guys like it was my mom. I advocated for it widely. I convinced a lot of people to fly Southwest. And I don't know what the heck I was smoking. Like,
let's revisit. You said Southwest is the only airline that it gives you human rights.
I said some crazy things. Like, I'm truly baffled by it. And I think this is my first time as a public commentator of having to come forward and it's like, man, I got it really wrong. And I hope that you don't distrust me on my other opinions because that was just way off base. And I will eat the crow and have intellectual humility. I flew Southwest last week for the first time in months and months and months because I have a lot of like points and just like flight credits left I need to use up. And you and I are still running a very slim ship at Base Politics. And sometimes if I need to fly somewhere just to keep cost at zero, I will bite a bullet, fly Southwest, and use those. So I did it last week when we went to DC, and it was the peasantry. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I used to live like that. Like having to scrap for a boarding position and get a seat, the like communist seat sizes where everybody's equally crammed in. Like I hated it. There was no lounges. I had to sit in the like basic airport bar like a plebe and like scrap.
Oh wow, what a struggle.
It sucked. It really sucked. And I'm flying it again next week to go to Nashville for the Atlas Society convention. And I am already I already hate my life next Tuesday and Thursday. Like I'm just, I can't wait till all these stupid flight credits are done so I can stick with Delta. And you guys don't fly Southwest. It's not even cheaper. I don't know why I guess you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't have lounge access and I had status on Southwest. And I will say having status on an airline is make or break. If you don't have status, it's going to be a terrible experience. So pick one, stick with them, get some status. You'll probably be okay. But yeah, I really am sorry, guys. Southwest sucks. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Leave us a comment. We will make sure we have time for the mailbag next week. And until then, stay baked.